Okay, going live on LinkedIn and YouTube. Just got done with other social media, so LinkedIn and YouTube is last. So over the last 3 or 4 months, we have taken a lot of questions from our cohort members, put it on ChatGPT, and asked it like, hey, what are some of the top questions, or what are some of the themes in the questions? So why AI operation breaks down between teams? Uh, that's the one ChatGPT has listed up top. So yeah, I think we are focused more on teams, the people side of things, rather than the process and technology. Because if we have the right people, the process just gets that much easier, right? And the biggest topic in artificial intelligence world is how the technology works. But what we want to talk about is that the AI is not the technology, AI is the process. AI is the process of collecting the data that technology will use. AI is the process of how the people will feed that process and use AI to improve that process, right? So the technology kind of over evolving. So so when it comes to AI ops, breakdown between the teams happens because of inability to sustain how difficult it is to actually do the AI ops. All right. Because when we did DevOps for the last 20, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, however long, software programming, coding, one of the things that we've done is we've taken a task and had somebody take that task and automate that task through software and coding and passed it on to the production environment. And in production environment, it either works or it falls apart, but we find that out eventually once it's delivered. And one of the things that happens in the DevOps or things of that nature is that the data is collected differently, as in data doesn't have a continuous feedback loop. What it has is a data collection method, but that data collection method goes through a cycle that is far longer than machine learning, ML ops, or AI ops will allow. Because if you want your AI to work, that feedback loop is the most important part. And if you don't have it, you probably create an alternative. But even before you get to that feedback loop, these teams find out eventually that on mile zero, they have all the good ideas, and mile two and three, they work through all these use cases. But by mile 50, they're realizing it's far more difficult than they thought it would be. And the reason we didn't do it 10, 15, 20 years ago is because we didn't have the hardware and we didn't have those mechanism in place for us to be able to do that, right? So now we do. Now we have these tools and mechanism in place for us to be able to collect this data and continuously feed those data into our ops, and then have a version iteration and release these new data with the old data, right? So that's what's happening with AI ops. So breakdown between teams is really is about the data ownership, the unfortunate things of data silos, right? Because no matter how sophisticated our data processing is today, we don't collect enough data, right? So when teams hear about data, they seem to realize it's a challenge and they're probably not prepped for it. So I guess the answer to that is that it's the process that falls apart because the process has to be continuously maintained. So it's not, you cannot automate the process. You deliver automation through the process. So if you're on the people side of things, you cannot outsource everything to the process. You have to be really involved and hands-on. And that comes back to the question of where does the ownership gets lost after deployment. So the OCM part of it, the organizational change management, so the leadership and decision makers, they really have to be trained on this, because the succession of what used to be like in technology, right, which is that a left seat, right seat, come in and get trained and take you 30 days maybe. That's not how AI ops, ML ops, and LLM ops will work, right? They have to be really succession plan, sort of like a Venn diagram. Somebody has to really come into the middle of the life cycle and say, all right, I'm going to be the next one that's taking over this data. So really, they have to be prepped with a lot of data knowledge. Again, in the DevOps, data collection process was different. With AI ops, data collection process is going to be far more different and far more difficult to comprehend. Because of course they're not there in mile zero, so they're not going to know a whole lot of information, the incentive behind why they invested so much into AI ops, but they will have to take the ownership of it and they have to steer the ship. And they can steer the ship in as many directions as possible, but the foundation model, again, this is something that technical, but don't have to worry about it. Foundation model is literally what dictates how the AI will do its thing. So you really have a lot of data under that foundation model, and that data has to be really, there's a lot of security to it. There's a lot of maintenance to it, and if the leader or the next generation of leaders are not able to comprehend that, like where the data sits and how it's connected with the foundation model, it really becomes a disaster of quality degrading, right? So sometimes, say for example, the model drift that we talked about last week, the model drift, it's been a problem. It's going to be a problem. We have to always keep our hands on and eyes on what's happening in our production model, and the ownership really affects that. Why trust erodes between human and AI system? Okay, I think I'm going to take that next time, or possibly do a different version of it. What strong teams do differently before things go wrong? I guess the comprehension by the people that the process is a little different in DevOps than MLOps, AI ops, and the observability piece of it. That's the big component of it, right? Because if you rely on yourself to be the total observant of everything's happening in a production environment, and you're not relying on observability to augment you on that, that's what something that will go wrong eventually. But as in a strong team, you don't go after any use cases that you think is a good fit. You observe that use case, score the highest one, but even if it scores highest, you break that apart to a minimal. So in DevOps world, we call it KISS, keep it simple and stupid. But for AI ops, ML ops, I call it KISS, like as in keep it interoperable, scalable, and sustainable. So if you see my LinkedIn profile, it says KISS on it, is because it's keep it interoperable, scalable, and sustainable. So if you see a use case that you have scored highly amongst your peers, by the time they get educated, they actually go back to the top scoring one and say, let's not even go with that one. They probably go with the third and fifth one, and then break that down even further and score that, right? So the use cases at that point doesn't even need scoring, because it just becomes obvious that that is the one that's far more interoperable, scalable, and sustainable. Scalable and sustainable has a lot of financial reasoning behind it, because if you want to scale it, you have to invest in it, right? But the interoperability is just common sense. If it works with other things, it's going to be far more scalable, and if you can sustain it, that's because it's bringing in a return on investment, right? It's either making you more money, saving you more money, or it's keeping things at low risk, right? Um, so that's what I think the differentiation between the strong teams is, that they go way back before they jump in thinking on mile zero, I need a data scientist. On mile five, I need a data something, right? Like you don't have to bring in everybody from outside on mile five, right? I think at this point, because of 2025, I probably would have said back in 2017, 2016, 2016, when we were doing a graph database for machine learning for recommender system, we didn't know a lot of information because we didn't have chat gpt, right? We didn't have a way to ask that because it was time consuming. So instead of bringing in somebody on probably say like end of the mile 100 journey, right? Like say maybe mile 70 or mile 60, we'll bring in somebody from outside. Uh, uh, Today, we'll probably bring them in like mile 80, right? Because if you can do it in a way that you utilize your team and you have all the different personas and you're engaging those personas to deliver this AI machine learning for you, you have to upskill them, because one of the things that we just talked about here is that the ownership part of it. Yeah, there's a single individual that's owner, but is your team really prepped for what happens post deployment? Post deployments is where things get more expensive. Post deployments is where things break. So if your team that you have right now that is on mile zero and they're not ready for what happens after mile 100, really you have to think about that. That's the most expensive part of it, because you're going to spend so much money on hardware, software. Yeah, those things matters, but if you cannot keep the ballooning cost after mile 100, um, yeah, let's go back to the board. Let's go back to the whiteboard again and do that whole KISS model again, right? So I think that's the answer, but it's a lot of ways to peel the onions here. The other two questions was how incentives quietly create risk. Yeah, I'm already on my 10-minute mark, so I'm gonna move on to the next one. Why trust? I mean, I'm gonna close this live stream and then probably come back next week and discuss why trust erodes between human and AI systems. Yeah, well, we talked about it last week. So we talked about last week the drift, right? The model that drifts. The model drifts for multiple reasons, but one of the things that I talked about in because I know, as an ethical hacker, I am pretty convinced that we're going to have lots of these sabotages that's going to come from the end users, just to try to break the system. I think they will, because that's the human nature. We like things that works, but we want to see how strong it is. And somebody's going to be out there sabotaging it just to see, like, if it breaks or not. And, we've seen that with the IAM and UAM, with the users trying to escalate their privileges and things of the nature. So we'll see. But next week, we'll see you guys. Ciao.